Hey, this is Zander Fryer, founder of High Impact Coaching and the author of Shit You Don't Learn in College. And if you're looking to be in better health, better mindset, and better overall fulfillment, then you should be listening to the Hacked Life podcast with my good friend Joel Evan.
Hey, what's up? Joel Evan here, host of the Hack Life podcast and weight loss coach for busy men. I'm excited to tell you I just dropped an 8-week program dedicated to motivated and busy men who want to lose weight. Let's face it, guys, when you lose weight, you feel more confident and you have higher self-esteem and you go out and you crush the world. You crush your goals and you start living your higher purpose. So if you're interested, DM me at Joel Evan Coaching or email me below, info@joelevancoaching.com.
All right, I'm here with Zander Fryer, best-selling author, speaker, and the host of the podcast, top podcast, The Shit You Don't Learn in College. Zander, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And, you know, for people that don't know, I always like to just highlight my guests. I've been lucky enough to have some key mentors in my life. And, you know, you're one of them up there. And I'll tell you why, for anybody that doesn't know, is that, you know, I didn't know, never met you, never heard about you. Last December, I was lucky enough to meet somebody from your team who introduced me to you, and you completely revolutionized not only like my mindset, but you helped me build an online business where I was never able to do that for the last 7 years. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. That's why I'm here. That's what I do.
So I definitely want to talk about that because I think you can help inspire a lot of people, and you have already. But I'm just curious, like, can you tell me like the day that you realized, like, you know, I want to, because your background is you were making $200,000 a year. You had an amazing job, and you said, screw this. This job doesn't fulfill me. I want to do something else, and I want to impact the world in a huge way. So can you tell me the day you realized, you know what, I'm going to switch all this, and I'm going to become a coach, give up my high-paying job to become a coach and start an online business to inspire others?
Yeah, I always think that's you know, that's really funny because people always ask me, they're like, you know, Zander, you like super cliche millennial quits corporate job to start life coaching business, right? The only difference was I actually figured out how to make money doing it, so I could do it full time and then go help others do it as well. But yeah, you're right. So about 5.5 years ago, I was working at Cisco Systems, so I was making around $240K a year. So nearly quarter of $250,000 in my job at Cisco Systems. I was still in my 20s. So as a kid in his late 20s making $250,000, you know, I always tell people I had what everybody like told me was success, right? I drove a BMW. I lived on Venice Beach. My clients were like C-level executives at places like Disney, Facebook, Sony, NBC, you name it. And like I had a great life by all like societal standards, right? But I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel fulfilled. I felt empty, right? I felt like this was all kind of like it was all a facade, really. And the more quote unquote success I had, the more I realized like this isn't making me any happier. This isn't making me any more fulfilled. I think a lot of people chase the external factors that most people describe success with: the watch, the car, the title, all of those things. And in doing that, they miss what success is actually supposed to be. It's a feeling, right? And so basically what happened, the day you mentioned, it was actually over the course of about 2 days. So very long period of time. So it was one faithful Saturday evening. I was having a conversation with a mentor of mine. And I think this is a really important part of the story as well, because I already had the wherewithal to have mentorship, even when I was still in a 9-to-5, kind of like you, right? Like, I already had the wherewithal to have mentorship. Jim Rohn says you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? Well, if you have dreams of becoming an entrepreneur or doing something different at some point, but all you do is hang out with other 9-to-5ers, you're never going to become an entrepreneur. Right. And so I had a couple of different entrepreneurial mentors that I had conversations with every few months just to kind of like, you know, pique my curiosity and things like that. I read books to always be like, I was always kind of, you know, we were just talking about this earlier, Joel, but like bombarding my subconscious with those entrepreneurial thought processes and mindsets and ideas. So I was having a conversation with one of my mentors, and he goes, Zander, what would you do if you couldn't fail? Right. And I was like, well, I don't know. I'd probably like, you know, mentor people full time. I used to be in Air Force ROTC in college. I was actually going to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force. On my senior year, I got a DUI and I was actually kicked out of the Air Force. So I basically told him, I was like, you know, since I got kicked out of the Air Force, like that's the big thing that I feel I'm missing. Like I want to mentor people. I want to lead others. I want to help people. And I'm just not doing that at Cisco right now. And he said, well, great. Well, why don't you go do that full time? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, what's preventing you from like going after that? Right? If that's what you really want to do. And I said, what do you mean? I've got this amazing job at Cisco. I'm making $250,000 a year. I'm on track to be one of the youngest directors in Cisco's history. I've got all this great momentum, right? And as I was saying all of that, I could I didn't want to admit it, but I could tell subconsciously, like, this is the biggest load of bullshit excuse I've ever heard, right? But like deep down, I knew it, but on the surface, I didn't want to acknowledge that, right? And luckily, I had a mentor that was very straightforward and very honest, and he basically just said, you know, just because you're on a path, does that mean you should walk it? And just because you're good at something, does that mean you should do it? And I was like, okay. And he goes, Zander, when you get to my age, one of the things that you realize is the one resource you can never get back is your time. Time is the only thing you cannot buy more of. You can get more money. You can't get more time. And every moment off purpose is a moment wasted. And he said, Zander, do you know the difference between you and me? And I go, well, you make a shit ton more money than I do, because he was making 7 figures at the time. And he goes, the difference between you and me is I'm actually living my dream. And ever since you got kicked out of the Air Force, you've just been dreaming one.
Wow.
And he goes, you say all these accomplishments, you say all these things that are coming up ahead of you. And he goes, I just see a scared little kid, afraid to go after what he really wants.
Whoa.
And he cut straight through my bullshit. You know, like, here I was, this cocky, confident, like multi-6-figure earning guy, you know, like fancy suits, flying first class, like, you know, buying rounds of drinks for everybody. And he just goes, you're just afraid. Get real with yourself, because that's the truth. And he was right. And basically, like, I remember that conversation. I still remember that conversation. I still remember the bar that was at, right? It wasn't a bar. It was fueled by a little bit of tequila, as most conversations are.
That's why this was a 2-day realization, not a 1 day.
This is why this was, exactly. This was a 2-day realization, because it had to catch up with me later.
Yeah.
But I remember the next day, I didn't talk to a single person. That Sunday, I didn't talk to a single person, because I was so lost in my own thoughts about, like, he was right. Like, what am I actually doing with my life? Like, how can I keep going down this path? And, like, you know, all these things, and like, what do I really want? And like all of those sorts of things. Next Monday morning, I remember going to my 8 a.m. call, and it was like the 8 a.m. Disney call. And I sat through that 8 to 9, and all I could think about was, man, I'm never going to get that hour back. And then 9 to 10, we had the NBC call, and it was, man, I'm never going to get that hour back. And then 10 to 11 was our engineering call. Man, I'm never going to get that hour back. 11 to 12 was the sales call. Man, I'm never going to get that hour. By the time it was lunch, all I could think of was, I just lost an entire morning of my life that I will never get back. And that was the big realization for me. The big realization was I was wasting the one resource that I could never get back. And so I called up my manager, and I just go, Frank, I'm done. And he goes, who gave you an offer? Where are you going? What's happening? I don't know. He's like, what do you mean you don't know? He's like, where are you going? Who gave you an offer? I was like, nobody gave me an offer. He's like, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't know, but I know that it's not this. And that's all that I know. I know that this isn't it. And the more time that I spend doing this, it's preventing me from focusing my energy on effort and figuring out what, quote unquote, it is. And that was the big thing for me, was like, I realized that I had to quit my job, and I had to go put all of my energy into figuring out what it was, so that the rest of my time moving forward, I could be aligned with it. Right? So that was the day that I quit.
You know what's crazy is that I just read your book, The Shit You Don't Learn in College, which we're going to get into. But
great book. Phenomenal book.
Phenomenal. It'll be a bestseller like your last one. But what strikes me is also interesting is that you weren't like at your job at Cisco, you weren't like just doing okay. Like you were like one of the number one salesmen. Like you were.
I was the second ranked salesperson in an organization of 1,200, and I was technically an engineer. So I was an engineer that held a sales quota because I was really good at what I did.
Yeah.
And I was the only person in the top 50 that was like under 40 years old. So it wasn't like I was in a dead end job. I was actually one of the top producing people there. So
yeah, and it strikes me that it's amazing the way your life took you, because you could have easily just said, well, I'm doing really well. Let me just continue to find purpose in this job. But you chose not to. You said, no, fuck it. There's so much more for me to do. I found that amazing.
I think, big thing for me, because I think a lot of people, right? Like we're always tied to what we know, right? And this is something, we talked about this at our live event that you were just at last month, but like our subconscious craves familiarity. It craves it, right? Because if you think about it, like as evolutionary man, right? Man or woman, I should say, as evolutionary human, like our subconscious, our brain programming kept us, its goal was to keep us alive, right? So it wanted to stick to things that it knew to keep you alive. So basically the unknown to your subconscious, which is just trying to keep you alive, is like a stay away from the unknown. Only stay in the areas that you know, because that will keep you from dying. Well, most of the unknown world today is not going to kill you. Right? Most of the unknown world is actually where your true purpose and your true fulfillment, true happiness and joy and impact really are. It's somewhere that you've never been before. But whatever it is that we do, we're always going to have to push against our subconscious, pulling us back to familiarity.
Yeah, so it's almost like you need to. If that scares you, you should probably lean into it, and
you should probably do it.
And go that way.
So just to give you a little insight to that first year in business, that's literally what I did is like, and I'm not sure if you've heard me tell that story, but when I quit my job, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to build a business. I didn't know how to make money. I didn't have a list. I didn't have a following. I'd never been an entrepreneur before. The one thing that I did know is I knew that my current level of knowledge and expertise and experience was not going to get me to where I wanted to be, which was a 7-figure business as a coach. It wasn't going to get me there. So I knew that really the only way that I could, if I wasn't good enough and I didn't have the knowledge and expertise I needed, well, then I had to grow, right? Well, if I had to grow, then I had to do something new and difficult and uncomfortable every single day. And if I wanted to grow faster, I would do more uncomfortable things, and I would do them quicker, right? So the more uncomfortable I got and the faster I did the uncomfortable things, the faster I would grow, which would therefore hopefully theoretically mean I would build a business quicker. And I was right. Right. But basically, like every single day I woke up and I asked myself, I called it my big cojones action. You probably remember reading this in the book, but every single day I woke up and I asked myself, what's the one thing that scares me the most today? Go do that. And it was literally that simple. Like, what's the one thing that I'm the most afraid to do today? And that was the first thing that I did every single day. And I did that for an entire year. And what do you know? By the end of a year, I had my first month where we made $100,000 in the coaching business. So
yeah, and you did that in a year, under a year, which is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, but it all came back to just what we were just talking about, right? It's like every single day I did something I was unfamiliar with. I did something that scared me. I did something that made me uncomfortable. And what happens when you go do the unfamiliar is it becomes familiar. Right? Like I can do so much more now because all the things that used to be unfamiliar to me, I'm familiar with. Right? So, you've probably heard me say this before. Like if I blew up my entire business, I could probably build another 7-figure business in about 60 days.
Yeah.
Because all of those things that most people are afraid to do and are unfamiliar with, I'm very familiar with. So I could just go do them really quickly.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, just on this topic that you're talking about, and I've noticed this throughout just your career and just things that I've learned about you over the last year, and you mentioned, like you said at the conference we were at recently, is that you are someone who I've noticed who you make mistakes quickly, and then you course correct quickly.
Joel, are you calling me a fuck up?
Well, not at all, because what I
in the nicest way, I'll take it. In the nicest way.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is like how crazy, in a way. I'm like, wow, this guy, like his mindset is just so strong and almost you have to almost be crazy to be in that mindset, which I find fascinating. It's like most people that make mistakes and be like, well, I tried, and then that sucks, and I guess I should never do that again. Yeah. You actually relish in making mistakes, and you want to make them faster and faster and faster so you can course correct. I'm curious, have you always been that way, or did that take some kind of like training to like get to?
That's a good. I think it's a combination of both, right? It's funny you asked that, because when I first started my business, I was less than 30 and I had built a 7-figure business, and people always, I used to get coaches that would come in and they'd be 60-year-old coaches, and they're like, how am I supposed to trust this 30-year-old kid, right? And they quickly realized that the facial age was very different than the amount of wisdom I had. I tell people, right? Like I had a business coach come and work with us, and he was about 50, had 30 years of business consulting and mastery experience, right? And he said, he asked me, he's like, what am I supposed to learn from a 30-year-old when I have 30 years of business experience? And my first response to him was, do you have 30 years of experience, or do you have 1 year of experience repeated 30 times? And he literally was just like, he looked at me a little bit upset and goes, touche, let's get to work. Right? But seriously, right? Like, so I have been breaking shit since I was 2 years old. Right? Like that was my, like, I was lucky enough to have parents that did not get too upset with me causing problems, like lighting the neighbor's yard on fire. And like I was constantly breaking stuff. But in that ability to break things and quote unquote not die, right? I learned very quickly that I learned a ton from a lot of the mistakes that I made. I learned more from the mistakes that I made than I learned from trying to learn in school and things like that. So I did learn that when I was young, but it was really instilled when I became an entrepreneur and I really started to study what made the most successful people successful. So one of the books that I recommend everybody reads, especially if you're an entrepreneur, is a book called Go for No, right? And Joel, you've heard me talk about it before. We talk about it in our program. And one of the principles they talk about in Go for No is they literally lay out your possible level of success based on how you relate with failure, right? And so the whole idea is, everybody on the face of the earth has the ability to fail. 100% of people have the ability to fail. We can all fail, right? The top 20% of people are willing to fail because they know that failure will lead to some form of learning and growth and betterment, right? You're willing to tolerate failure. You don't like failure, right? Most people are afraid of failure. Why? Because people judge you, people criticize you, and some of our biggest fears are the fears of social shame, the fears of social judgment, the fears of social criticism, right? This is by far one of our biggest inherent fears as humans, and I can talk about that in a second, why that prevents people from wanting to fail. But most people are willing to tolerate failure, or 20% of people are willing to tolerate failure to learn from it. Now, these end up being the upper, more successful people in the community. But then there's like the top 5% that aren't only willing to fail, they actually want to fail, right? They know that failure actually teaches you, so they want to fail. They actually desire failure. This is a huge shift, right? Mark Manson talks about in his book, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, like, the whole idea is as soon as you can stop giving a fuck about the judgment, the criticism, and everything like that, you're going to be okay with failing, and you're going to actually want to fail, and that's going to be what really provides growth. So the top 5%, 1 out of 20 people reach this. Now, this is where you really start to become successful. This is kind of where I was at in Cisco. I was making multiple 6 figures. I was very successful. I was the top person in the organization, or second-ranked person in the organization. Very successful there. Because I wanted to fail and I wanted to learn quicker. Then there's a totally another level. That next level is not only do you want to fail, this is the 1% of the world. This is not only do you want to fail, but like you mentioned, I want to fail bigger and I want to fail faster. because I know if I can fail bigger, I'm going to learn bigger. And if I can fail faster, I'm going to learn faster, which means I'm going to accelerate my growth process. And the faster I accelerate that, the bigger results I see in a shorter amount of time. Right? I've always had this obsession with time, right? Time being a limited resource that we have on this earth. So I want to make sure that by the end of my time on this earth, I've treated it as such. I've given it every opportunity to live fully from purpose, from love, from growth, like really give my all to my time on this earth, right? And so not only am I okay with failing, not only do I want to fail, but I want to fail bigger and faster. And then the last level is doing that exponentially. So teaching other people to do it as well. And this is what my goal is to do now. And obviously with high impact coaching and shit you don't learn in college, teaching people these concepts so that they can go do that as well. But really that desire to fail, it's a super weird relationship that most people don't have. But when they do make that shift, results come flying in. That
was one of my favorite parts of the book, by the way. I underlined the hell out of that because it's just such a reframe on failure and just the mindset you can have because, and I know I've heard you say it too, like starting a business, like I think you said, like you have to be crazy because it ain't.
You have to be illogical. Yeah, you said like it's crazy what I do. I'm like, yeah. If you like think about it, right? If for you to be logical, right? Logical means following social rationale and social norm. Well, if you want to follow social rationale and social norm, you will be a mediocre person.
Yeah.
That's it. If you're cool with being a mediocre, normal person, then be logical. If you want to do something more, if you want to do something different, you have to be illogical. You have to do something different than what everybody else is doing. It's literally in the definition. Success is having more and accomplishing more than what other people have and accomplish. So if you're doing the same as everybody else, there's physically no way to do that.
Yeah, great point. I wanted to ask you, your business is thriving. You're already a best-selling author. Your podcast is on fire. Why did you feel the need to write this book at this time, The Shit You Don't Learn in College?
That's a great question. This book was actually written 5 years ago. So the book was written not fully out, but it was outlined. It was in my mind 5 years ago. And it was from conversations with my best friend AJ, who committed suicide 4.5 years ago. So that's where the idea was originally started. It was originally I started the concept because me and my best friend, I was this successful corporate guy, and then I went on to become a successful entrepreneur. And AJ was probably one of the brightest, one of the most connected, one of the most loving people that I've ever met in my entire life. And also one of the most aligned with himself creatively and purposefully, right? He was my first mentor. The problem was the traditional bureaucracy, the schooling systems, the everything didn't work for him. And throughout his entire life, it made him feel ashamed of who he was. It made him feel like he was not good enough, even though he was more creative than I am. He was a brighter light than I am. He was more loving than I am, than I could ever be, right? And he struggled with trauma and PTSD and addictive tendencies for 10.5 years before committing suicide. So the system itself caused one of the brightest people, and not just mentally bright, but emotionally bright, spiritually bright, caused one of the brightest people to extinguish their own flame. That was really fucked up to me. And so I basically committed to putting this book out about 4.5 years ago after AJ committed suicide. And I went to go get the trademark. And when I went to go get the trademark, the government actually did not want me to put this book out.
I saw you write that. I thought that was just some fancy marketing that you came up with.
No, this is true. So I went to go get my trademark for shit you don't learn in college, and I got back 2 weeks later. I got back a 12-page rejection letter from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office detailing how they would never give me the trademark because the idea of shit you don't learn in college was lewd and offensive to the idea of higher education.
Wow.
So here I was trying to point out the gaps in the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy basically gave me a big middle finger and said, no, you can't do it. So I actually took that to a lawyer, and we took it to court. So we took it to court. It was about a 2.5 year legal battle, which ended at the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court ruling that it was unconstitutional for the USPTO to not give me that trademark. So basically, they overturned the USPTO's ruling. The USPTO had to give me the trademark. So now we have the trademark, we have the book, and here you go.
I did not know that. That is so good, and it just goes back to everything we talked about, your mindset and just your forthwithness to continue to keep going, and not take no for an answer. That's amazing.
I'm a firm believer that like when you know something has to happen, like when that idea strikes you, like you have to find the conviction to make it right. You have to find the conviction to bring it into reality, because the world, I'll get woo-woo on you for a second. The world or the universe or God or Mother Earth or whatever the hell you believe in, seventh dimension aliens that are pulling the puppet strings. I don't care what it is. But like, whatever it is, like when you're given that idea, like you have to work on your own conviction to making it happen. Because if you don't work on your conviction to making it happen, somebody else is going to go make it happen who has the conviction. Right? Like I'm sure everybody listening to this, I'm sure you've had the idea of something you want to do and then you don't take action on it. And then you see somebody else go do that exact thing and be wildly successful. Right? And you're like, oh man, I should have done that thing. It's like, stop wishing that you should have done the thing and just like go after it, go take the action. But that's what it was for me. It was like, there's no way that I am letting this not happen. So
yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious what your answer is going to be, because I wanted to ask you, obviously you've coached hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. You've helped them build 6-figure online coaching businesses. And I was curious, is there a common theme that you see that like kind of transcends for people that holds them back, the people that don't make it? Is there like a common thread?
Yep.
And is it that lack of conviction that we're talking about, or?
So there's really two things, right? And they're kind of the polar opposites, right? So I always tell this to a lot of people, like the number one thing that will dictate someone who's successful and someone who's not is desire. That's it. Desire. It's very, very simple, right? The simple reason that one person succeeds and one person doesn't is one person wants it better than the other. I don't even know if bad is a word, but more bad, whatever it is.
More better.
Right? But more better, right? So, but like, you could say, well, Zander, what about not knowing how to get there? Well, if you want it bad enough, you'll figure out how to get there. What about not knowing, not having this resource or that resource? If you want it bad enough, you get resourceful to figure that shit out. Right? Well, what about if this happens and this happens? I lost my best friend 6 months into me starting my business. I went into a deep, dark depression for 9 months where I didn't want to get out of bed. I was bawling my eyes out every morning. But deep down, I had such a conviction of the fact that I had this purpose and I had to get there that it actually became fuel for me to move forward. Right? So the number one thing is you just don't want it bad enough. And a lot of people are like, well, Zander, I wasn't born with this fiery desire. I hear you talking on this podcast and you're bringing the energy, you're bringing the rain, right? I wasn't born with this. I'm an introvert. What? Yeah, Zander is an introvert. I don't like talking to people. This fire, and Joel, you and I were just talking about this earlier. I stoke this flame every single day. Every single day when I wake up, I've got visualizations and affirmations, and I'm working on my identity, and I'm working on my mindset, and I'm working on my conviction, and I'm working on building the energy and creating that person so that I have the desire to succeed in the things that I want to succeed in. I'm not born this way. None of us are born this way, right? We all, like, deep down, we are evolutionarily programmed. No joke. We're evolutionarily programmed to Netflix and chill, right? Our brain, little side note for everybody, our brain is so big, and Joel, you probably read about this in the book already, but our brain is so big compared to our body, right? It takes up 2% of our body mass, but it consumes between 20 to 30% of our energy. Our brain consumes 20 to 30% of our energy, even though it's 2% of our body mass. Now, evolutionarily, what this meant was our brain had to find a way to turn off more. You're evolutionarily programmed to not think, to be lazy, to not want to act. Because as evolutionary man, if you thought too much, it would use between 10 to 20 times the amount of energy and you would die over the course of 4 hours. Like if you didn't find food 3 times a day, you would perish if you thought too much. So you're literally programmed to Netflix and chill to stay alive, right? But if you start to program yourself the other way around, to be an action taker, to cultivate that desire, to stoke that fire inside, you will have the desire to lock on to a dream and a vision of where you want to get to and not let it go. Most people lock onto a vision or a dream and it makes them so uncomfortable because it's so far away from them that they go, oh, that's too much, and they give up on it. But if you lock onto that dream and you grab it with all your might and you say, I'm not fucking letting go, you slowly, step by step, start to move yourself towards it. And it's not a quick process. It's not an easy process. It's not a comfortable process. And frankly, a lot of the time, it's not a fun process until you start to make it fun, right? I'm big on like the whole whistle while you work idea. I'm going to work my ass off, but I'm going to make it fun while I'm doing it, right? And you have to lock onto that dream and you have to like be convicted into this idea of like, I'm not letting this go. I'm 100% in. And that person is terrifying because they will accomplish anything. That's Elon Musk saying that he's going to die on Mars. And all of us going, fuck, he probably is. Right? Yeah. Like that's batshit crazy, but he is. He's going to.
Yeah.
Right? But that's what that is. So number one is they just don't have a strong enough desire. And I say that in, reminding people like nobody's born with that desire. The people that get there stoke that flame. They lock onto a vision. They remind themselves daily. They do visualizations on it. They affirm themselves getting to that goal, right? And they really lock onto that vision with a conviction. And then the second part that prevents people from getting there is fear, right? Oftentimes, this is what prevents people from allowing themselves to lock onto a vision, right? It's very simply the fear, not just any fear. We were just talking about failure. It's not even the fear of failure, right? Because people actually don't fear failure. They fear being seen failing. That's what people actually fear. So what happens when you're seen failing? You're criticized, you're judged, right? And in that process, we feel the emotion of shame. Shame is the lowest energetic emotion that a human can feel. Dr. David Hawkins talks about this in his book, Power versus Force. It's the lowest energetic emotion you can feel just above death. Literally, like shame is just above death, to the point that if you think about, I was just talking about my best friend, AJ, committing suicide. He committed suicide out of what? Out of shame. I've studied suicide. I've studied this. A lot of people who commit suicide, a lot of people who go into deep, dark depressions, they go into these deep, dark depressions out of shame. People fear shame more than they fear death sometimes.
Wow.
Right? That's what really holds us back, is this fear of being judged, being criticized, feeling ashamed, and being socially ostracized. So let's go back to evolutionary man. Why is this a thing? Right? Well, as evolutionary man or woman, we're in small tribes of 30, 50, 100, 200, whatever it might be, right? Now, if you get socially outcast in a small tribe of 100, you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So obviously that makes sense. Being socially outcast, really bad for survival, right? But I don't know if you noticed in the world today, being socially outcast, like we don't have saber-toothed tigers hanging out in the bathroom, right? If you're socially outcast from one group, you can go find another group, right? Or if you're socially outcast by one person, most of the time it's because that person's a dick to begin with and nobody really cares, right? So the whole ideas of shame and social criticism and judgment are completely different than what our brain actually associates it as. Our brain associates shame and criticism and judgment very, very closely with death, right? And that's the big issue. So because of that, we're more afraid of what people think than pursuing our dreams. We're more afraid of doing something and causing it to ruffle some feathers. We're more concerned with the feathers ruffled than us being happy and fulfilled. Because our subconscious thinks it's going to kill us. So the two basic things, the things that I see the most, like what prevents someone from being successful and what skyrockets someone to being successful, I would say, number one, cultivating the desire, and number two, letting go of the fear of shame, criticism, failure, and judgment. If you do those two things, there's no way you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, I love that. One of the stories you tell a lot in our mastermind, and something that you in the book that you mention a lot, is reprogramming that subconscious and reprogramming it with the affirmations, visualizations, the belief breaking exercises, all these things. But one of the stories you told that I really love, that stuck with me, is you are in your own masterminds with some high level people. And I remember you said, whoever the head person of the mastermind said, hey, I want everybody who hit their goals last month, their financial goals. And like 2 people rose their hand, and one of them was you. And then that person said, great, how many of you were doing your mindset and visualization work every morning and you didn't miss a day? And you and the other person were the only 2 that rose your hand. Yep. And it's like, okay, well, there you go. There's a reason why these 2 guys or gals, or the other person was, there's a reason why these people are coming out on top.
Yeah.
So it kind of ties in with everything you said. I just love that.
Yeah, in the end, right, like, and this, we teach a lot of tactics, we teach a lot of strategy, we teach a lot of systems to be successful in business. But in the end, those things don't matter if you're not going to be the person to work the systems, right? Like we always say, like, how come you can have, John A and John B, or Jane A and Jane B, you can give them both the same systems, the same frameworks, the same tools, the same support, the same tactics, right? Give them all the exact same things. But Jane A is, working on her mindset. She's driven. She's overcoming the fears of shame and criticism and judgment. She's decisive. She's an action taker. She's confident. She's going to go make shit happen. And then Jane B is timid and afraid of people judging her, and not cultivating that desire, and staying, wants to stay, hidden, right? Well, which one of them is going to be successful and which one of them is not? It's pretty clear Jane A is going to be the successful one, even with all the same systems, skills, strategies, and tactics. In the end, like the difference is the space between your ears. Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to highlight in the book too that struck me, and I highlighted this too, and I'm like, wow, I never heard this. And that is, you said success loves speed. And I thought, no, it doesn't. Like, success is like choppy. It goes, like, there's all these like kind of plateaus. Yeah. What did you mean by that?
So success loves speed. Yes, success is stair steps, right? You do succeed in stair steps, right? But the people who are willing to go through the iterative process, the growth process that we were talking about earlier, right? So you have to be willing to take an action. You set a goal, you take an action toward that goal. Most of the time you fuck it up, and you learn from the action that you took, so that you can reassess your actions, reassess your processes, reassess your goals, and then go take another action, right? Now, in order to be successful, you have to go through this iterative process. Let's say that to build a lot of our clients want to build 6-figure or multiple 6-figure coaching businesses, right? So let's say that in order to build a $20K a month coaching business, you have to go through this iterative process a minimum of 30 times. That's just the law, right? So it's going to be a minimum of 30 times, okay? Now, once you get through those 30 repetitions, you're going to be there, right? Here's the interesting thing, is if you do this faster, let's say you go through this iterative process like, well, we'll call it like every week, right? If you go through this iterative process every week, then halfway through a year, you're going to have a $20K a month business, right? If you go through this iterative process every month, right? Well, by that transitive property, we would think, okay, well, 30 times every month, now it's going to take us nearly 2.5, 3 years, right? Well, here's the kicker. When you take that much time, right, the learning starts to drop off. So you get slower in your growth. So it'll actually take you 40 times or 50 times. Mm. Here's the real kicker. If you do it too slow, you're never going to take off. Like I always tell people, like an airplane, right? Getting a business up and running, success is like an airplane. If you get in an airplane and you give the airplane 50% throttle, is it ever going to take off?
No.
What's it going to do?
It's going to keep pittering, going up, going down, going up, going down.
It's going to pitter along it's going to pitter along the runway. And then by the end of the runway, it's either going to crash and burn or you're going to bail.
Yeah.
Right? That's why most people don't succeed, is because they don't ever give it enough gas. So by the time they hit the end of the runway, they crash and burn. Most people burn out because they never really, like, when people talk about burning out in their business, it's because they actually never gave it full throttle. They went 30% or 50% for a year, 2 years. You just mentioned 7 years.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you burn out in a business, is by doing 20%, 30%, 50% for 7 years. And then you develop this long-term mindset of, oh, this is never going to work because I've been doing this for 7 years, so I'm never going to be able to get there. When the reality is, if you went, screw this, 100% throttle for 6 months, you're virtually guaranteed to take off. Right? Virtually guaranteed. So success loves speed, because the truth is, at some point to really get going, you have to give it 100% throttle. And when you give it 100% throttle, you can get up to cruising altitude, and then you can pull back to 30 or 50% throttle, right? And then you can cruise. But if you never give it 100% throttle, you will never reach cruising altitude.
Love that, man. Love that. I'm looking at the time. I want to jump into some lightning round questions. You down for that?
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah, let's do it.
If the old you could see the new you, what would the new you say?
Ooh, how old?
No, I would say where you're at right now.
But I mean, but like how old is the old me?
Oh, the old you. Go. I don't know. How about pre-Cisco or Cisco?
In Cisco?
Yeah, maybe like probably right around then.
I would say trust the process. It's going to be one hell of a ride, but you're in the right place. Just keep making scary decisions. That's what I would say. Love it.
What are some choices that you think you made that made you who you are today?
Well, I think, I talked about this in my TED talk. It's not, some choices. It's what I strive to do for all choices. I talk about this in my TED talk. I truly believe that purpose is not an outcome. Purpose is a decision that we make in every single moment of every single day, right? Our life is literally just a string of decisions. One decision after another that leads us down a path of fulfillment, joy, happiness, freedom, love, financials, or leads us down a path of unhappiness, lack of connection, lack of love, lack of fulfillment, angst, all of those things. And it all comes back to the decisions we make, right? So just like you mentioned, what are the decisions? Well, I would say I strive as much as humanly possible to make every decision from a place of purpose, love, and growth, and less from a place of fear. So 90% of our society makes majority of their decisions from a place of fear, right? And it's what keeps us stuck. It's what keeps us in these places of unhappiness, of lack of fulfillment, and it's quickly killing us, right? Like suicide rates are at an all-time high. Depression is at an all-time high. Forbes said that 87% of all 9-to-5 employees are unhappy, disconnected, or depressed in their roles. So only like 1 out of 7 people is actually happy in their jobs, which is crazy, right? But people stick around out of what? Out of fear, right? So, I strive every decision, no matter how big or how small, I strive as much as humanly possible to make my decisions out of a place of purpose and not out of a place of fear.
Love that, brother. You're such a force in like the personal growth world, I would say, and the business world, man. And the entrepreneur business world. Who's someone that inspires you in those areas? Maybe there's multiple.
The first person that comes to mind is my wife, Maddie.
Nice.
I don't think a lot of people would think of her as like, the force in the business world but she's, in my opinion, she's one of those people that she doesn't have to have a huge audience to make a huge impact. And she holds amazing standards for myself and other entrepreneurs that are 8-figure earners. And, she brings an energy and a joy and frankly, a drive that like even drives me. So my wife, Maddie, has to be the first one that really inspires me, because like she's the one that holds the standards that really allow me to hold the high standards for myself. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the book Go For Now, but are there like a top 1 to 3 books that jump out at you that had like the most impact on your life that you'd recommend people read?
Yeah, there's an amazing book called Shit You Don't Learn in College.
Yeah.
There's a ton. It really depends on like what someone's looking for. Go For No is absolutely amazing if you're an entrepreneur or a salesperson of any form or kind. The two books that have been overall like some of the biggest impactful books on my life. One of my personal mentors, Jack Canfield, wrote The Success Principles. His book was definitely one of the catalysts for me leaving my job. So yeah, Jack's an amazing guy as well. That book is phenomenal. And then the other one is a bit more spiritual and a bit more woo-woo. It's Autobiography of a Yogi.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know who's heard it or who hasn't, but it's so Steve Jobs put it on basically in his funeral. He gave everybody an iPad with Autobiography of a Yogi on it. It was one of the most influential books in his life. Michael Singer talks about it in The Surrender Experiment. But that book, I've probably read that book 5 or 6 times over the last couple of years, and it's definitely been a guiding principle for me in my journey.
Awesome. Any rituals or hacks or practices that you like to do on a regular basis? You know, some people have the gratitude journal.
So many. I think, I have a lot of the same ones that a lot of people have. Like you and I were just talking about this earlier, but like, working out every day and like eating properly. And I'm really big on cold therapy. So I actually have a cold plunge in our backyard. So I'll dunk myself into freezing cold water every morning, even when it's already cold outside. So I'm a huge fan of cold therapy. Probably the biggest practice that I think nobody else really talks about and is probably my best kept secret to success is something that I call fear journaling, or we've now recently redubbed the emotional dump. So basically, every morning I now do this on my iPad, cause I have my fancy iPad here. But I used to do this in a notebook, and literally I would just write out my most negative thoughts. Most people never, like you mentioned, they think of the gratitude journal and like that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's important. But that shit doesn't work. Like visualizations, gratitude work doesn't work unless you do an emotional dump before. And what I mean by that, right, is if you've ever tried to do visualizations or affirmations or gratitude work and you go try and be grateful for something, in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, but this, yeah, but that. Or like you do a visualization of where you want to be and your brain is thinking, but yeah, you can't do this. Yeah, you can't. And it's all this negative self-talk. Basically, these are all your negative thoughts, your negative emotions that are undealt with. And because they're undealt with, they're just marinating in that 95% of your brain that is your subconscious. So you actually need to get them out of your head. And so I do that with what I call a fear journal or an emotional dump. Every morning, you literally just go write out the most negative shit you can think of. All your deepest, darkest fears, all your angers, all your frustrations, whatever it is, right? You just need to get it out of your head and onto paper. Because when it's sitting in your head, if you ever find yourself like with these repeated negative thoughts throughout the day and they just keep coming up, it's because that's buried deep down and you're not allowing yourself to move through it and get it out. Right. And so most people, when I talk to most people, they're like, yeah, but Zander, the law of attraction, like what you focus on, you bring into your reality. Now, I believe in the law of attraction. And this is why this is so important, right? Because think about it. 5% of your brain is your conscious mind. 95% is your subconscious. So if I have a thought that I'm not good enough or I can't achieve my goal, right? Or a fear that I won't be able to achieve my goal. What if I don't achieve this goal? What if I look like an idiot putting myself out there, right? All the fears we were talking about. So most people go, I don't want to feel that because then I'll bring it to reality. So they turn it off consciously. Well, where does it go? It just goes down to the subconscious and marinates in the 95% of your brain that actually dictates a majority of your behavior and your outcomes. So you think you're doing yourself a service by not feeling through this thought or this emotion, when the reality is you're just piling up a big pile of shit in your brain, which is bringing a lot of shitty stuff into your world. So every day, I journal out all my negative thoughts, all my fears, all my frustrations, all my angst, all my anger, my resentments, my guilt, all the things that you don't want to feel. Go feel it. Right? Scientifically proven, there's decades, even centuries of encyclopedias written on this. The only way through an emotion is through the emotion. You have to sit in it. You have to feel through it. So that's probably my best kept secret is every single day I have a really negative journaling session to get it all out of my head. Because once it's out of my head, then the rest of my day I can go play around in the visualizations and the affirmations and I'm feeling great because I got the negative crap out to begin with.
Yeah, nice. Last 2 questions, then we'll wrap it up. Finish this sentence. 2020 crushed a lot of people because of the pandemic and everything. So I want to reframe it. 2020 was the greatest gift because ...
2020 was the greatest gift because it was a forced meditation for everybody.
Yeah, love it. And then last but not least, Zander, where can people find you?
Yeah, they can find me at zanderfryer.com, ZANDERFRYER.com. So if you're a coach, you're looking to build a coaching business, check us out there. You can also check out the book, Shit You Don't Learn in College, on Amazon. Or if you want to get, I think we're giving away like $3,000 worth of free programs and stuff like that. You can go to sydlicbook.com. So that's SYDLIC book.com. That stands for Shit You Don't Learn in College, in case you couldn't tell. But SYDLIC book.com.
Awesome, man. Zander Fryer, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks, boss.